Good morning to everyone, and I want to thank Dr. Nao and his staff for hosting me today. It's a real honor for me to be able to participate in this talk, especially the first of the semester. And I'm really looking forward to speaking with you. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to ask. Otherwise, in the end, we can have a Q&A session. Okay, let's get started. So here's the agenda for today. I'll start with some quick introductions. I'll be short because Dr. Nao already went through that. Then we'll go over some definitions, just to get you acquainted with some of the jargon in our industry. And then we'll talk about some typical airport functional areas. And then we'll jump into the development process, the typical development process. And then we'll get into a little quiz. And then we'll talk about some future innovative and future perspectives. So I'm the founder and principal of IDTS Consulting, which stands for Infrastructure Development and Technology Services Consulting. We focus on planning, design, management, operations, and consulting services, in addition to technical training. The technical training aspect of our business is really why I'm here today, and that's the reason why I was able to get in touch with Dr. Nao to start a potential partnership, and hopefully, be able to work with you and teach you some of the skills in our industry, because it's heavily needed in this country, in this continent. The aviation industry is very important when it comes to global business, when it comes to international trade. You have billions of passengers flying through airports throughout the world every year. You have millions of tons of cargo being transported. You need some infrastructure to support all of that transportation. And that's where the airport planning and design is really the field for you to focus on if that's something you're interested in. I've been working in this field for over 15 years. I'm still learning, it's still evolving, and it's open to innovation and technology. So some of you in this room may be some of the pioneers and may be able to work on some of the new technology that will be adopted by our industry. So please keep that in mind. And these are some of the services we offer by category. So facilities development, a lot of infrastructure development, a lot of CAD, a lot of GIS, and I'm using some of the tools that you guys may be familiar with. Yes, ma'am, go ahead. Excuse me. Yeah. We are extremely interested in what you are saying. And please, can you speak louder? Absolutely. 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 Is that better? Can you hear me a little better now? Yes. Okay, perfect. All right. So, we provide services in the facilities development, some management, some technical skills that we have are simulation, computer-assisted drafting and design, GIS, and simulation. We also provide some training. So this is a little bit about me. You already heard, about my background. So I'll add that I'm Senegalese. I was born in Dakar, and I went to college in the US. After starting my curriculum in France. I graduated from a university called the Florida Institute of Technology, College of Aeronautics, and I started my career in consulting then. I was able to work in several states in the US, Ohio, Illinois, New Jersey, New York, and lately California. Spent a couple of years in India, in the city of Mumbai, participating in the Mumbai Airport Expansion Aviation Program. And I want to tell you a little bit about Transsoft Solutions. Transsoft Solutions is a company that develops tools to enhance productivity in these fields: civil transportation, traffic and safety, and aviation solutions. I'll show you a product and a little animation that I was able to create using one of their tools called AviPlan. It's one of their premier products for aviation planning and design and operations. And hopefully that's something that we'll be able to share, through some other workshops. Okay. So some definitions that I wanted to share with you, just to get you familiar with our jargon, and these are my definitions. This is my best definitions for these terms. What is an airport? An airport is a set of infrastructure and system designed to accommodate the safe transportation of passenger and cargo by air. Airport planning is a set of studies and plans and technical reports needed to determine the infrastructure and systems needed to accommodate forecasted travel demand at airports. And airport design is a set of engineering drawings and technical reports prepared to facilitate the construction of airport facilities to specific industry standards. As you may know, aviation is heavily regulated. And that's why you have a pilot that's able to travel from Senegal to the US and be familiar with the airport environment. It's because everything is regulated. The way they communicate, the signs they see as they travel from the runways to the airport and to the taxiways, the markings they see, they're all color-coded. The light they see, they're all color-coded. They all mean something. And so when you have to design and plan an airport, you have to be very familiar with those standards. So I had the opportunity to work both on civil and military projects, and the ability to understand those standards and apply them to different projects is key. A little more about that. Most countries follow ICAO standards. ICAO stands for the International Civil Aviation Organization. It's a UN branch focused on civil aviation regulation. And most countries adopt those standards and sometimes customize them as they see fit. In the United States, the FAA, which is the Federal Aviation Administration, took those standards and adapted them to the needs of the country. So we follow those standards when we design airports in the US. So a little bit about airport functional areas. These are 3 key functional areas that you'll see at most airports. First, the land side, which is color-coded in yellow. The land side is all the elements and all the transportation facilities needed to get to and from the airport. So as a passenger, you may get on a car, you may take a train, you have to get to and from the airport, and that area is non-secured, accessible to everyone. Then you have processing facilities. Either terminal processing facilities, they can also be cargo. That's why I didn't call it terminals. You can have cargo processing facilities as well. And then, as you go to the processing facilities, you go to some security and inspection of some sort. And that's how the public and that's how cargo is able to get from the land side to the air side. The air side is heavily regulated. The air side is only accessible, to vetted and I guess employees who went to background checks, pilots, employees like myself. You can't get on the air side easily. And it's really interesting to spend some time there because you're really, at the backstage of the airport. You know what's going on in the background. You see all the logistics. You know what it takes for all the employees to work together to get you and your luggage and your cargo on time from one destination to the other. And that's something that I really enjoyed throughout my career, by the way. And this is an aerial imagery of our Blaise Diagne Airport. Very nice facility. I'm very proud of it. I'm very proud of the work the government did. And to be able to build an airport up to international standards is something I'm really proud of. And when I landed last time, I was able to see that they're only working on the extension of the terminal. So that means that business is booming, and that means that our travel industry is growing, and that's a good thing. Then these are the steps that you typically go through when you want to plan and design and construct an airport, or when you also want to extend or modernize an airport. So it applies to both what they call brownfield and greenfield projects. So you have to start with a plan. When the plan is finalized, you have to get into the design engineering aspect of the project. Then you get into the construction. And then you get into the operational readiness and airport transfer. That's the bridge between the construction and the commissioning. And finally, you get into the commissioning. That's when you open the facilities to the public and to your tenants. And so when it comes to planning, these are the steps and the considerations that are taken into account. So you have to define the scope of what is it that you're trying to accomplish. You have to select a site if it's a new airport. If it's an existing one, you don't have to. That's a step you could skip. Then you have to get into the inventory of existing facilities. You need a starting point. You need to know where you're starting from. You need to know the facilities that you have available for you. You need to know in which status they are, whether you need to replace them, whether you can reuse them. All that is something that you factor in. Then you need to develop a forecast of your activity. You need to know what your demand will look like. I usually look at a forecast in a 20-year horizon. The planning process, takes you 20 years from your starting point, just so that you can avoid having to do it every so often. Once you have that, you translate your demand into a fleet mix. So you determine, based on the demand that you expect, what type of aircraft you're going to need to accommodate that demand. And then among the aircraft in that fleet mix, you need to select your critical aircraft, which will be the one that will guide the way you're going to design an airport and the standards you're going to use. So you typically don't want to select the largest aircraft necessarily, because you may only have occasional passage, occasional takeoff and landings, what we call movement in our industry. So what you want is to have the largest or a group of largest aircraft with similar characteristics that use your facility often for you to justify designing it to those standards. And then you determine the facilities you need at that particular airport. How many runways? How many taxiways? How many gates? What type of gates? Are they contact gates to the passenger boarding bridge? Or can you get away with a transporter system when you have people getting from a bus, from the terminal, to the aircraft? What type of roadways do you need? What type of trains do you need? What type of access do you need? What type of utilities do you need? What will be the power demand? What will be the waste management? What will be the utilities needed? All of that is taken into account. And then once you determine all of that, all the space requirements and all the system requirements, you then develop alternatives on that site that will be able to accommodate that demand. And then you vet those alternatives using different parameters, and you vet the pros and the cons of each of the alternatives. And then through that vetting process, you select your preferred one. Once that preferred alternative is selected, you then have to, create a cost analysis for it, right? You need to determine what's your rough order of magnitude and how much money you'll need to deliver that project, and how many years it may take you to do so. You also have to consider the environment. Because as you know, the aviation industry contributes, to pollution. Aircraft nowadays, do pollute. And you have to recognize that there are efforts, to move from fossil fuel powered aircraft to more sustainable sources of energy, right? Eventually electric. So those efforts are underway. Sustainable aviation fuel initiatives are underway all throughout the world, and that's something that needs to be celebrated. That's something that needs to be encouraged, and that's something that some of you guys may get involved in. And then you have the noise aspect as well. Noise is a big issue. So manufacturers are coming up with quieter aircraft because neighbors don't like airports. In the US, they complain a lot. They want to be able to go anywhere. They want great travel services, but they don't want the noise associated with it. And we understand that. And then you get into the phasing. The phasing is really how you're going to implement that preferred alternative. You need to come up with that plan, you need to have an idea of how it's going to go, and then you need to have that firmed out. And then at that point, your planning process is completed. And then you're able to get into the design. The design is when you take that high-level plan and you drill down to a high level of detail to determine what you're going to need to really implement some of those projects. You start with one, you start with few. You're not going to build all the required facilities for the 20 years from the onset. You'll have to phase it. So you're going to start with different phases. You're going to scope out those projects, and you're going to have plenty of professionals with different skill set, different expertise come in and work together to make that happen. You're going to have some civil engineers, some geotechnical who are going to study the soil that you have, and determine the type of foundation that you're going to need. You're going to need some architects to make sure that they build a pretty nice facility, pretty modern facility, because terminals are definitely looked at from that perspective. They need to be functional, but people want it to look pretty as well. You're going to need some structural engineering that are going to make sure that your structure is actually to standards. You're also going to need some water engineers, electrical engineers, communication engineers who are going to come up with your whole network of utilities. You need to power all the facilities. You need to make sure there's potable water. You need to make sure that there's communication. A lot of communication going on at the airport between the tower and pilots among themselves, operations among themselves, and all of that needs to be planned out and implemented because it's really key to the safe operations of airports. And then you'll need IT as well. The IT is a big component of airport operations as well as security. And then finally, you also need to come up with your estimated quantities and also with the cost estimate to deliver those projects. So here, I just wanted to show you a quick animation using a tool called AviPlan. AviPlan is a tool developed by Transaf Solutions that I mentioned earlier as a partner. And what you see here is a layout that was created with AutoCAD. I assume some of you are familiar with AutoCAD. It's one of Autodesk's premier product, for facilities design. And so this tool is a piggyback software to AutoCAD. So it works on the AutoCAD platform, and you use that to perform analysis to validate your design. So in this case, what I was trying to show was an aircraft circulating from the taxiway and going to the parking position, another aircraft being towed from another parking position and leaving the apron to go towards the runway to take off. So that tool is pretty powerful. That's why I wanted to spend a little bit of time on it, because it can allow you to do a lot of analysis. Jet blast analysis is another feature that can help with conflict analysis. Passenger boarding bridge compatibility, because you have to understand that when you have an airport, for each of the passenger boarding bridge, they serve different aircraft types. And then you need to make sure that your markings are set in such a way that pilots and personnel on the ground know exactly where the nose wheel of each aircraft needs to be located for the passenger boarding bridge to be able to serve that aircraft. Because those boarding bridges have a range of operability, vertically and horizontally. And so you need to be able to respect that, especially the horizontal aspect of it. Because if you think about disabled passengers, people on wheelchair, and even people with limited mobility, you don't want them to get into the boarding and slide into the aircraft, right? You want to be able to have a slope that is actually acceptable and to standards. Okay. Then, once you're done with the design phase, and you're ready to construct and to implement those facilities, these are some of the considerations that need to be taken into account. Permitting with all the regulatory agencies that you may need to work with, maybe the power distribution company, the civil engineering authority. Whatever facility you need to deal with, you need to make sure you have all the permits ready for you to start implementing those projects. Then you need to think about a schedule, because those construction projects take a long time, a lot of effort, and are impactful from a noise standpoint. You have trucks hauling materials coming in and out. You have a lot of drilling, a lot of equipment in use that generate a lot of noise. So those are some of the considerations that you need to take into account. You also need to think about communicating with your stakeholders, maybe letting your neighbors know that you're going to start that project and that you need to anticipate some impacts, right? And if you're working on an operational facility, you need to make sure that your passengers know ahead of time that you're going to initiate those projects and that you're doing everything you can to minimize those impacts. Then you need to think about safety. Making sure that you have a safe construction site, making sure that your workers' safety is your #1 priority, making sure that you have some performance monitoring systems, some KPIs that you use to make sure that your project is progressing the way you like. And make adjustments along the way, because no one has a crystal ball, so you can plan, but when you start implementing, you have to make adjustments along the way. Then you need to think about quality control. I also already talked about the impacts to passengers and the public. And then once you're done with your construction, you have your beautiful facility, you have your systems in place, you think you're ready to go, but there's one more step that most airports are going through nowadays called the ORAD process. And the ORAD process is really a bridge between the construction and the activation of the site. It's really an exercise that allows the airport or the sponsor to make sure that the facility is ready to accommodate all the passengers on day one. Because you always going to have some potential issues. Some systems may not be working. You may have some small adjustments to make in the terminal to accommodate some of your passengers. And this is a picture of a live exercise that we complete at LAX. That's the airport I used to work at. When we open a new terminal, we're testing, the facilities. We're pretty much pretending to be passengers, and we're going through the whole check-in process, taking our luggage, getting into the bus and testing all this and providing feedback to the design team, the construction team, to make sure that the facility will be ready to be operational on day one. And then once all that is done, you're ready to go. This is when you have the ribbon cutting ceremonies. This is when you have public officials come in, make speeches, and open the facility. And at that point, you're ready to go. So that's an overview of the typical airport development process. Any questions so far? No? Okay, good. So now let's get into a little quiz. You're looking at an aerial image of an airport. And I wanted to ask you to guess how many runways are at that airport.
How many?
How many runways? How many pieces of pavement are available to accommodate takeoff and landings of aircraft? Someone said 2. Okay. Do I have another guess?
1.
1. Okay, 1, 2. Did I hear 12? No? Okay, that's a lot. Okay, 1 or 2. Okay, that's it? 4? I heard 4. Okay, we have 1, 2, and 4. Okay. 4 is the right answer. And here they are highlighted for you. So you have 2 sets of parallel runways. And then these are spaced in such a manner that you can use them for simultaneous takeoff and landings, which is very, very advantageous from a capacity standpoint. It allows you to have a high throughput of takeoff and landings and a high capacity at your airport. And can you guess which airport this is? That's a hard one. That's a hard one. That's LAX airport. Yeah. LAX. Great. Then another question for you. So you see these numbers, 7 and 25? Okay, next slide. You see that? There it is, okay. Can you tell me what these numbers mean? Now we're talking about runway nomenclature.
Speed.
Again?
Speed.
Speed? Okay, I have speed. Any other guess? Again? No, speed. Okay, you have two speed. Okay. Any other guess? The distance? Okay, good one. You got speed and distance. The angle? Okay. The angle is a good one. These represent the runway orientation. And if you look at this compass, this is how runways are named. So we determine the heading of the runway, the magnetic heading of a runway, and then you pretty much take off one of the digits and you end up with either 1 digit or 2 digits to determine your runway. So when you look at any air image of a runway, you should be able to orient yourself and know where the north is, approximately.
So the north corresponds to which number?
Exactly. 0, north is up, then you have south at 180. There you go. Then you have the west and the east. Yes.
So the pilot knows this prior to landing?
They know this prior to landing. They know on which runway they'll head. And most of the time, due to aerodynamic principles, aerodynamic forces, you want an aircraft to take off and land against the wind. So that is predetermined. At an airport, you also have weather stations that do monitor weather patterns, that do monitor visibility, do monitor wind speed and wind direction. And then the air traffic controller will make decisions about runway pattern based on that. So they'll know, okay, you have to land on runway 25 or runway 27. They'll know that ahead of time. And there are also some procedures that you can't see here that allow each airport to know exactly which procedure to follow to take off or land. And then I also want to mention that when you look at airports, when you travel around airports, pay attention to the landscape around it. You can see that it's pretty flat around the airport. That is because there are some imaginary surfaces, protective surfaces at airports that we also incorporate into the planning and design process to make sure that the airspace is safe and navigable. Those are 3D airspace dimensions. Yes, sir?
Now, when you design the airport, you've got to take care about the weather, the wind.
What we do, you do a wind analysis. When you determine the number of runway that you need to do a wind analysis. You need to observe and monitor and analyze weather patterns to understand where the predominant winds are coming from in that area. And that's how you determine where you're going to place your runway and what orientation they'll follow. And then once your facility is activated, you follow those patterns and you understand whether you need to go from one direction or the other. But your wind analysis allows you to determine the predominant wind and then making sure that you may need, sometimes you may need what we call a crosswind runway. Your main runway may not be able to accommodate most of your traffic, and in that case you may have a secondary runway that's actually crossing the main runway, and that's going to accommodate the traffic needed to operate in those conditions. Good question.
How about the quality of the land?
Yes.
The soil, the land, what type of soil?
Great question. So the geotechnical engineer would do some boring analysis. They'll take some samples of the soil, they'll analyze the soil, and then they'll come up with the requirements from the pavement. Then you have the pavement engineer who will get to determine the profile of the runway, what type of concrete, what is concrete or asphalt at the top, and what type of subsurfaces are needed to support the critical aircraft in the fleet mix. It's a good question, sir. So I want to spend a little bit of time on this slide. I call it looking forward, to talk about the future of the industry. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what the future will look like. I hear trends. I think some of the items listed on this slide will be part of the future of aviation. But the beauty of that perspective is that the future is yet to be determined, and that we can actively participate in shaping that future. Right, so I wanted to list some of the technologies that the terms you may hear about. Fuel efficiency, zero emissions. Those are really important themes in the industry right now, because aviation professionals understand the impact that the industry has and aircraft have on the environment. And everyone wants to make sure that we have, a planet to live on for the next couple of years. So everybody has to make an effort to protect the environment. And we may end up with electric airplanes. I've seen some concepts. I don't know how far out those are, but we may end up with airplanes that are fully powered by electricity, which would be amazing. But any effort to reduce the carbon footprint and to develop and to put more fuel efficient and more sustainable fuels for aircraft should be encouraged. Then you have supersonic flight. We haven't heard of any supersonic flight since the Concorde accidents a couple of decades ago, but I know some firms are actively working on that technology. Because if we're able to travel faster, if we're able to reach further destination faster, that should be encouraged as well. Because some flights are pretty long, like the ones I took to come here. Then urban air mobility. Urban air mobility has to do with unmanned aerial systems. And there are efforts underway all across the globe to integrate unmanned aerial systems into national airspace systems to be able to transport both passengers and cargo. At this point, there's a lot of talks about the policy implications, the socio-economic implications, the technology needed, and also the facilities needed. Because the reality is that most drones, take off vertically. So they don't need the same footprint as, a Boeing 747 that's going to need like a long runway to operate. And so the design of vertiports, the standards needed to design vertiports are all being developed at this point, all being, in the research and development processes. And you're going to hear a lot more about that. So if that's an area of interest for you, you should definitely do some research on that. And then you have space travel. Probably heard of companies like Virgin Galactic, Blue Origin, who want to take humans, to space for space tourism. Again, they use different type of aircraft that need different facilities. They don't quite need the runways that the spaceships, are using, the NASA spaceships or the SpaceX spaceships, but they need other facilities that are adapted to those type of aircraft. You're going to see a lot more efforts and a lot more R&D in that development as well, in that field. And then when it comes to building airports, you always want to do more with less. We want to build faster. I mean, some airport projects takes years to complete, and the industry experts are really looking for ways to reduce that time frame. And so modular construction is actually one of the technologies that's being talked about. So imagine being able to specify your building requirements and being able to have the pieces or the entire building be able to run and being installed on your site rapidly. That cuts down on your cost, that cuts down on your implementation time frame, and those are technologies you're going to hear about a lot too. And I'm sure there'll be other technologies that we'll hear about, and I'm sure, some people in here will participate in some of those efforts, and I look forward to hearing about that. There are many difficulties. So I'd say the hardest part is to convince the public that a facility is needed and that we have to go to the whole construction phase and all the impacts that go along with that to get to the point where the facility is built. Oftentimes, we get pushback from passengers. Why are you building new runway? The neighbors say, why are you building new gates? We don't want more noise. We don't want more aircraft at this airport. And so that's the hardest part. Sometimes they don't really appreciate the work that's being done ahead of time. They don't really appreciate that there are planners and engineers who build these facilities and who monitor them. So a general planning practice is to build a facility and to monitor the use. And when you reach 60% of your capacity, you need to plan for the future. And then when you reach 80% of your facility, you need to implement the new facilities to make sure you don't reach 100% without the new facilities in place. And so to me, that's probably the hardest part, is to make sure that the public understands why we undertake those projects. I'd say it's the most important. It's probably not as difficult as engineering and construction, but it is the most important. Because you need that vision. You need to know why you're implementing a facility and why you're implementing the way that you're doing it. Because you always can come and plan and build something, but you need to have that master plan, you need to have that vision plan to make sure that everything makes sense, all your facilities make sense, work together now and 20 years from now. And planning is the only step that takes that bird's eye view and gives you that perspective.
Yes. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for your question. Any other question? Yes, sir.
I think before doing the design, you got to empathize about what people do. You got to know what they do.
Yes.
Personally.
Yes.
And after that, you can know how you going to build the design to make people their life easy to take.
That's a good point. So during the planning phase, there are some public outreach events, right, that allow the airport sponsors, that allow the developers to talk to the community, to gather input at an early stage and to provide some information on the facility that are going to be built. So that feedback is taken into account when we plan and design these airport facilities. Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
I was asking if some students can do internship in your company.
Is some?
If some students can do internship with you.
I'd love to make that happen. It's part of our plan. I'll definitely keep you all posted on that. Thank you. Yes, sir.
How many years be able to design?
I'm sorry, can you please repeat that? There was some construction on outside.
How many years?
How many years? Okay. I'd say depending on the role that you have, a 4-year degree is probably good enough. I'd say a 4-year degree to a graduate degree is good enough for you to get into this field. What I would recommend is, if you're interested in this field, is to take some aviation classes, some aviation planning and design classes during your curriculum. Because oftentimes what happens is that you have engineers and planners who have overall knowledge of civil engineering or urban planning and who need to learn the aviation industry standards on the job. So if you can skip that step and make sure that you take those classes ahead of time, it'll allow you to get into the industry easier and faster. But as a 4-year degree should be enough. A master's degree is even better. Yes, sir. Yes, sir?
How long does it usually take to build the average airport?
Oh, the airport, it depends. It's a multi-year process. It depends on the airport. Let's say if it's a greenfield project, where you don't have any constraints, you can come in and get rid of all the encumbrances. You can do your grading, you can do your planning, you can do your design. It's going to take a couple of years. I'll say maybe at least 2 to 3. And then, on more complex projects where you have an existing facility that you need to modernize and implement, it can take a much longer time frame. 5 years, more, it all depends on the project complexity. It's not a short process. Sure. Good question. Any other question? Yes, ma'am?
What are all the impacts of airport designing and also this all thing you said on Africa's development?
That's a great question. I think our airspace in Africa is an underutilized resource. You have surface transportation, you have roadways, you have highways, you have some train tracks. Most of them are congested. The difference between the airspace and surface is that on the surface you have one level, where you may have underground, but you may have few levels, and you still need to do some excavating, some boring to be able to utilize that. In the airspace, you can have airways that are stacked, above each other. And so when it comes to transportation, especially in our remote areas, we should be able to leverage, this technology, the new technology. We should be able to utilize our airspace better to be able to bridge the gap. Because we don't need, to build highways, throughout the entire continent, and that's difficult to do. You talk about, different countries, you talk about different regulatory agencies that you have to deal with, but when it comes to aviation, there are some norms that needs to be followed. But let's say if you're able to have different vertiports and different airports across the country, you're able to connect people faster, more efficiently, and really enhance the transportation of people and goods across the continent. I think it's key for the continent leaders, to be able to promote those initiatives and to implement those projects. And that's why I'm here.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in Africa's development.
Good.
And one day I want to see an independent Africa.
Good.
And now my question is, how many young Senegalese work with you in this area?
At this point, I have a couple of partners, who have different skill set. Some are more on the engineering side, some are more on the management side. And, we're trying to create those synergies to work together, not only in Senegal, but, on the entire continent. And we feel like, the continent would benefit from having some local, workforce and local Africans work together to be able to implement those projects. So that's one of the reasons why I started my own firm, because I realized that, in the U.S., yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much for the brilliant presentation.
Thank you.
I'm asking my question from a teacher's perspective,
Good.
especially a language teacher perspective. In the framework of your field of expertise, how important is communication?
Okay.
And which language scale do you mostly use?
Right.
For your job?
Right. Communication is key. I'll start by saying that English is the official language of the aviation industry. So I highly recommend, that everybody does everything they can to learn English, understand English, to be able to communicate and enter into this field. Communication is key at all levels. If you think about air transportation, you have communication between air traffic controllers and pilots. That is key, because the traffic controllers are really the eyes of the pilot. They don't see all the activity that the air traffic controllers, are privy to, but they guide them in the airspace. They guide them on the airfield. So communication between them is really key. And then you have specific physiology, specific terminology and jargon that are used from a pilot to a control to make sure that messages are conveyed effectively and are understood to avoid any mishaps, any incident or accidents. From a planning and design standpoint, you need communication between, I'll show you a slide with all the different entities that are involved in the process. Being able to communicate among each other is key to make sure that you can coordinate better, to make sure that no conflicts will be created. Being able to communicate with the stakeholders, the leaders, the neighbors is also key, because you go out to the community, you talk to people who are not technical. So you need to be able to take those technical concepts and convey them in layman terms, right? And then that's why, in the planning phase, you get a lot of graphics and exhibits that are pretty, that are very descriptive to make sure that we convey that message effectively to the stakeholders. Communication is key all throughout the industry.
And do you use oral or written communication? Which one do you use most?
I say written. Oral during meetings, oral during interactions, but everything has to be documented in this field. You need to keep the records. You need to make sure that everything is documented properly and effectively so that you have records to go back to if necessary. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
You said that neighbors sometimes disagree with the fact that they want us to add airways. So how exactly do you deal with their disappointment?
Right, so we really talk to them, we listen to them actively. We want to make sure that we hear their feedback, we hear their concerns, we take them into account, and then we show them that we really went through an entire process before determining if facilities were needed and why we're going to initiate those projects. So we do our best, to find a balance between understanding the neighbor's concern, but also understanding the infrastructure needs. And then we usually have PR departments and now with social media, we use a lot of social media to interact with them, and we do our best. But it's a never-ending conflict, right, between neighbors and airport developers and airlines. And most of the issues you hear about are noise-related. So hopefully, as technology evolves and as quieter aircraft are being introduced and integrated into the national airspace systems, hopefully that's going to alleviate some of those complaints. But we try. Yes, sir.
Why not just choose an area where there are no one?
Well, actually, that's usually how they start, and then the people come around it because people want to be close to airports. And then they complain. Thank you. Thank you. So think about Blaise Giant. Think about the neighboring communities that are empty now. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I doubt it's going to remain this empty. I think people are going to come close to the airport because people are going to travel, and everybody wants to be close to the airport. Nobody wants to travel hours to get to the airport. So that's a good point. And we have sometimes people who move in closer to the airport and then complain. When you move close to an airport, unfortunately, you have to expect some noise. Good point. Yes, sir.
What is IDTS?
IDTS? Oh, it stands for Infrastructure Development Technology Services Consulting. Yes, sir. There's a question there?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
When the plane is about to crash, what type of security do they use to prevent?
Okay, so when that happens, you have a potential incident or accident that's going to happen at an airport. Whether the plane is close to an airport or not determines which airport they're going to. In the case of emergency, they're going to go to the closest airport. But what you need to know is that when aircraft refuel, they make sure they have fuel to go from one destination to the other, but extra fuel, to go to an emergency airport if necessary. And at that point, the air traffic controllers really take over. Oftentimes, what they do, they just shut down traffic, and they'll have planes circle around and follow what we call holding patterns. So you kind keep them stored in the airspace until that particular airplane has landed and until the emergency services were able to come in, firefighter were able to come in and help them. And then once the situation is clear, then air traffic would resume. But the air traffic controllers will really be in charge of determining the plan of action. Good question. That happens. Rarely, because air transportation is the safest mode of transportation. But it does happen, and there are some contingency plans and emergency plans in place. Okay.
More questions, guys?
Yes, sir.
I was saying that difficulty to problem is with the last have a lot of problem to have a piece of paper like the build out.
Right.
Can this make it easier to problem?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know, because we're talking about the infrastructure aspect, and we're talking about, yeah, the visa is, I don't know. Yeah, I wish I had a solution, but I don't think it would, unfortunately. Good one, yes, sir. So, sorry, there's a question.
So we will like on time for your time.
Okay.
My first question is, what is the biggest challenge you faced, and which approach did you have to solve those problems?
Thank you. That's a really good question, and thank you for that. Thank you for the kind words. So I worked on a project recently at Los Angeles World Airport that was not popular but necessary. Because Los Angeles Airport is a very busy airport, lots of surface transportation, a lot of congestion issues. And the way the airport is configured, you have terminals that are arranged in a horseshoe pattern, and those roadways that lead to and from terminals are really congested. So the airport has a lot of infrastructure plans in place, including building a train system, APM, automated people mover, that is going to alleviate, some of that congestion that allow passengers to take a train from the terminals all the way to a highway where they have a constantly running car facility. So that project needed to be implemented because traffic levels were beyond catastrophic. So something needed to be done. It was not popular. It was impactful because what we ended up doing was doing studies, looking at a lot of data, coming with a facility plan to alleviate that traffic by making sure that some of the taxi and TNC Uber traffic did not enter the airport, and that we were able to gather and transport all the arriving passengers that use the facilities in shuttles. So we had to redesign the entire roadway system, dedicate some of the roadways to shuttles to make sure that those people were not, too inconvenienced. That project was challenging. The time frame was challenging. The budget was challenging. It had to be done. And the way we accomplished that was by working hard and by making sure that we work with every single entity, both internally and externally, to make sure that we're able to come up with the best plan of action and to implement that. It's one of those things that you're going to face. Some airports projects will be easier to implement, some will be very challenging, but when they are needed, you have to do it. The commissioning of that facility was challenging, but nowadays when you go out there, you see it's pretty smooth. So oftentimes people complain throughout the development process and sometimes when we activate those facilities, but over time you can gauge whether a facility was needed or not. Over time you can gauge whether that project was needed or not. Because people oftentimes forget about the time it took, the delays, sometimes the budget overages, if the facility works as intended. So that's why the planning process is really, really key.